Welcome everyone to another episode in the perspective drawing series. In this video we are going to be looking at how to draw ellipses in perspective. Ellipses are circles in perspective, and being able to draw them accurately will greatly improve your drawings and allow you to take advantage of some essential techniques. To begin, here's some useful circle terminology. The circumference is the perimeter of a circle. A diameter is any straight line that passes through the centre of the circle, its endpoints being on the circumference, and the radius is a line from the centre of the circle to the circumference. Also, a tangent line is one that just touches a curve at one point. And that's all we need to know at the moment. Let's start off by learning how to draw a circle using a square. To do this, I divide the square up as we have done throughout previous episodes. Now we have this divided into 4 quarters, and I divide each side into 10 sections. We can then extend these lines and create a grid. Now you're probably wondering how this can help draw a circle. Well, what we are looking for are these points here. I'll shade in each of these sections so that you can see this more clearly. It's these points which will help us define the circumference of the circle. Now I go ahead and draw this in. It's important to study this before we repeat it in perspective. Notice how the circle fits within the square and is tangent with each side. The centre of the square is, of course, the centre of the circle. So now let's do this in perspective. I draw the horizon line and I place a vanishing point. I then use this to draw in a square. I'll go ahead and eyeball the depth here. There is a more mechanical way to draw a perfect square, but for these examples this will be fine. We are going to be drawing an ellipse within this, so it's good to get it so it looks correct. Now I am going to divide this up as usual into 4 quarters. Next I'm going to divide each of these sides into 10 sections. To do this I will use a division technique that we had looked at in a previous episode. I can then use these points to divide this square up equally. Now here let's look for those points which will help us define the circumference of the circle, which will instead be an ellipse now, seeing as this is in perspective. Here I can now draw in the ellipse using these points to guide me. I also make sure the ellipse is tangent with each side of the square. This can be applied in many situations when drawing, and you'll often find yourself tasked with drawing ellipses. Let's take a look at how you can make use of this when drawing in 2 points perspective. I start with the horizon line and I also add the left vanishing point. The right one will be off the page. Here I establish a vertical square using the left vanishing point. I then divide up the square to draw in the ellipse. Now this square is at a much smaller scale than the previous example, which means it's not that practical to draw out a grid to help me draw in the ellipse as I did a moment ago. Instead, I use less divisions this time and draw out an ellipse using what I have here. Now I am going to use this square as the side plane for a box in 2 points perspective. I use the right vanishing point to construct this. Now this side of the box where we have our newly drawn ellipse is the same as this side, so I will go ahead and do the same here to draw in another ellipse. So now we have 2 ellipses at either side, and if I join these together I can create a cylinder. Again, these lines are still converging to the vanishing points. Before I move on, let's stick with this example and I'll do something else. I'm going to duplicate another one of these squares using the techniques that we have already looked at, and I'm going to repeat what I just did again to add another cylinder of the same size behind this. In terms of drawing, these basic forms we construct can be used to draw many objects, and you'll see many examples of me doing that as we progress with this series. It's good practice to spend some time drawing ellipses in different positions and on various angles. The ellipse always follows the same construction techniques within the square. Here I'm going to draw out some squares in perspective on different angles. Then I will divide these up and use those dividing lines to assist me as I draw in some ellipses. This becomes easier with practice. You'll start to be able to visualize the ellipse within the square, and eventually you'll be able to directly draw ellipses without the square. Now, an ellipse has a minor axis and a major axis. The minor axis divides the ellipse in half across its narrowest dimension. Here I'll draw this on these examples. Then there is a major axis which divides the ellipse in half across its longest dimension. It's the minor axis which is the most useful to us though, as it always intersects the centre of any foreshortened square which is drawn around it, as you can see here. It also always points to the vanishing point that is perpendicular to the ellipse. In this next example, I'm going to use a lot of the techniques that we have looked at up to now to create a drawing of a wheel in 2 points perspective. First of all, there are many ways to divide a circle, and it's good to know how to divide a circle and then transfer the divisions across to an ellipse in perspective, but that's something that I'm going to cover in the next episode. For this example, I'm going to use a quick technique that I learned from Scott Robertson's How to Draw book, which allows you to easily divide up a circle into 5 sections. As I said, I am drawing a wheel here, and most wheels that I see have 5 spokes on them, so this will be ideal. As you can see, I have drawn out a square in perspective and used what we previously looked at to create an ellipse here. Now to divide this up into 5 sections, I'll start by dividing this upper half of the vertical centre line into thirds, and then this lower half into quarters. Next, I will draw a line in perspective through that lower third point until it intersects with the circumference of the ellipse. I'll then do the same with the lower quarter. Now this gives me the points that I need for each of the spokes, and I can take lines from these to the centre. I extend some lines from this side plane and create a box at a size that is correct for the wheel that I am drawing. I then draw in a second ellipse, similar to what I did earlier in this episode. I then join these together to form a cylinder, and then I am going to offset this ellipse inwards, and I'll just eyeball this in here. I don't have an ellipse guide, so I'll do my best just to add another ellipse that looks right using what I have already constructed. I can now use this as the foundation to render a wheel in detail. So this was a rather brief introduction to ellipses. I am intending on making another part after this where I'll cover some more useful techniques. As we progress with this series, I'll be creating some example drawings which allow me to put all of this to use. If you found this helpful and would like to see more, then be sure to give the video a like, subscribe with the notifications on to not miss a video in the future, and if you would like to learn more then be sure to check out the Patreon page. I create what I refer to as study documents, which are essentially tutorials on paper. With that being said, thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.